So my name's John Stempien, and I've been connected to the apple farm community for 30 years working on dreams. Also, I have been the past director of the Hyde Bailey Museum in South Haven, Michigan, too. That is Hyde Bailey's birth home. It's on the National Register for Historic Places. And I was the first director there, and I would say like 2006. Sometimes it gets a little foggy. I was there for about 6 years or so. And that was my introduction to Hyde Bailey. So tonight I'm going to bring in two people then, Carl Jung, his ideas about the archetype, but then also this fellow Hyde Bailey, who's been known to be called the father of modern horticulture too as well. And the outline is for tonight, I'm going to talk about, first off, to lay some groundwork about the garden archetype, and talk about what an archetype is. Speak about Bailey briefly, a little bit of his background too as well, and share some dreams, and then we'll get into the archetypal motifs of the garden, what they are, through Hyde Bailey. So Hyde Bailey published books between 1885 to 1953. So over 80 books, but we'll be digging into some of his writings to see what he perceived, what I call his timeless garden writings. He wrote manuals too as well, wrote many books. The readings I'm going to give is more of the meditations about gardening too as well. And even if you're not a gardener, you may find tonight after leaving that you may reconsider whether or not if you're a gardener or not. Because I would say by the end of the night, everybody that's with us tonight is a gardener, according to Hyde Bailey. And I'll open it up. We'll see where we are time-wise to open up to any questions. And feel free, it's going to be a little loose in the format too. I'll have some pauses too as well with folks when they have a question. I'll also be sharing in the chat quotes too as well. For folks, if they want to follow, I'll be putting that there as well in the chat for people. So the first, we're going to look at the garden archetype and talk about what an archetype is. One of the foundation ideas from Carl Jung, this quote comes from, two of them come from Edward Eniger, talking about what an archetype is. And he says that they're energies that transcend the ego. Energies that transcend the ego and are experienced as numinous. So numinous being holy. And then also Edinger continues to say that Jung speaks about the dual standpoint towards the archetypal images. Tonight we're going to be talking about the garden image, of course. But talking about a dual standpoint, you want to keep that in mind as we walk through tonight. We've got duality happening tonight. He continues, namely recognizing that they're both objects and subjects. So that's archetypal images. They're both objects and subjects. He continues, that means that when we experience an archetypal image, we can study it as an object. We can describe it. We can classify it. But at the same time, it remains a subject. He continues, that means the archetypal image is a separate personality. It's an interior personality that has something of its own subjective will and intention, which is what we would expect when you encounter an outer personality, an outer subject. I found those two quotes to be helpful about the archetype, and I'll put those in the chat too as well. We'll find too with Bailey, his experience of the garden had those both pieces to it. There was both an object. I mean, he was a botanist. He was able to look at plants, classify them. He went on trips. He collected sheets. He had his own vivarium sheets. So it was a science too, but it was also a subject too as well. Bailey spoke about plants as a subjective personality. He would have quotes such as, plants have personality. And then another quote of Bailey, the longer you know plants, the more they mean to you. You never tire of old friends. And then also, he also talked about the company of plants. So that is another way, again, looking at plants, at least for Bailey, through his, so knowing the quotes, okay. See if I send it. See, there we go. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, now it's in where you can see the quotes there. To continue the idea of the archetype, and then we'll get into Bailey's biography, this comes from Margaret Eileen Meredith. She wrote a book called The Secret Garden, Temenos for Individuation, and she spoke about the garden as this too as well. And I think this really kind of cements us with Jung. The garden as a place of origin as well as destiny is deeply rooted in the Judeo-Christian tradition, linked to the mysterious beginning and end of human life. It's connected to the unfathomable central fire, the essence of existence. Thus, the symbol of the primordial garden radiates luminosity, while at the same time, its structuring principle. At other times, it seems transcendent beyond the boundaries of human earthly life. Thus, the garden's dual aspects, spiritual and biological, are part and parcel of the symbolic expression characteristic of an archetype. So again, she's speaking about that dual aspect of the archetype too as well. I want to get into Liberty Hyde Bailey now too. I hope that cements a little bit what an archetype is. We're going to look at the motifs, the archetypal motifs of the garden through Bailey and his writing. So who is Liberty Hyde Bailey? So Bailey's life spanned between 1854 and 1951. So talk about longevity, right? And he was born in South Haven, Michigan. I mentioned that his home still stands. Jung, actually, they had their lifespan was almost about the same time. So Jung, between 1875 and 1961. After going through almost all of Bailey's book, I have not seen one quote about Carl Jung at all. However, I always wish, like, I know I'm going to find that page where Bailey talks about Carl Jung, but I don't believe any of the, at least Bailey's writings and his explorations and also his learnings, it was strictly in horticulture and botany. So he did not, at least in his writings, did we find anything specifically about Jungian psychology or psychology. However, oddly enough, his writings lean towards some of those ideas too. And so that's what I'm going to be bridging for us tonight. So I'm going to be reading a lot of our sections tonight from the Liberty Hyde Bailey Gardener's Companion. So this is a book that me and my co-editor, John Lindstrom, recently put together. And it's going to serve as the template for tonight. So this isn't a preface, and this is going to give us a little background about Bailey. So ultimately, it was gardening, the most primal and personal practice of care that so directly links individual humans to the holy earth at their feet. They remained utterly central to all of Bailey's philosophical, educational, and scientific work. He was trained in botany, after all, and today he's perhaps best remembered as the father of modern horticulture, author and editor of such works as the Standard Encyclopedia of Horticulture, Hortus, the first horticultural dictionary, and the Gardener's Handbook, all which can still be found in bookstores of farmers, nurserymen, and gardeners to this day. In 1885, at the age of 27, at the tail end of 2 years working in the Harvard Herbarium for America's foremost botanist, Asa Gray, Bailey forever shook up the academic study of plants when he appeared before the Massachusetts State Board of Agriculture to deliver a legitimately stirring speech that he titled The Garden Fence, imploring that the imaginary fence separating serious botany from the plants of the farm and the garden to be torn down. It was likely before giving that landmark speech that Bailey excitedly informed Gray, his mentor at Harvard, but also his childhood hero, whose botany Bailey had carried around as a young man to help identify the plants he collected in the dunes and forests around his hometown, that he had been offered the opportunity to chair the nation's first Department of Horticulture and Landscape Gardening at his alma mater in Michigan. That's Michigan State University. It was Michigan Agriculture College at that time. Gray did not share Bailey's excitement. But Mr. Bailey, Gray protested, I thought you planned to be a botanist. Yes, Dr. Gray, Bailey would remember responding years later, but a horticulturist needs to be a botanist. Yes, responded Gray, but he needs to be a horticulturist too. When fellow Harvard botanist John Merrill Coulter heard the news, he told Bailey flatly, you will never be heard from again. And this next paragraph explains, as a Gray is looking down his nose about him, oh, you can be a horticulturist. To Gray and Coulter, to the academic establishment, generally botanists were scientists and horticulturists were merely gardeners. To Bailey, however, science and academic study ought to be coextensive and lived experience and relevant to it. A single citizen with a seed packet in the garden plot or lacking that even one plant in the tin can was simultaneously a scientist and an artist. Bailey knew that the digging, watering, and the weeding he did at the age 5 in that small garden of pinks in front of his childhood home was science, and science of the highest order, open-minded, driven by curiosity, and capable of inspiring a lifetime of happiness. He knew it was art, full of expression and personality too. From that first humble plot of pinks onward, every year in his 96-year life, Bailey found a way to keep a garden. Whether renting a plot of land in Shanghai while carrying on a series of studies in China or tending year by year the ever-changing garden beds in his home in Ithaca, New York, and on the farm he managed in the summers, this is one point on which he would make no compromise. He needed his hands in the soil, and the result of the insistent connection to the earth is a life work, including 76-book corpus that maintains a remarkable, stable, and coherent, if ever evolving, outlook on life and the world. So there is a lot that could be written about Hyde Bailey. I think, at least for our purposes tonight, that gives you a little bit of flavor of the man. And more of the flavor of him will come out when we listen to him tonight too as well. My connection to Bailey, as I mentioned, I was the director of the Hyde Bailey Museum in South Haven, Michigan. I started first as an intern, and in his home, amongst those books that he published were a small handful. One of them that I pulled off the shelf because foot traffic was kind of slow was a book called The Holy Earth. The title grabbed me. Of course, at this time I'd been with the farm. This sounded like a nice spiritual book. And after opening it, I decided to give it a shot. And it really changed my outlook to my worldview, as much as Jung has done with dreamwork too. And I'm just going to read a paragraph from this marvelous book called The Holy Earth, just to tell you the piece that really turned it for me. He writes, if God created the earth, so is the earth hallowed. And if it is hallowed, so must we deal with it devotedly and with care that we do not despoil it, and mindful of our relations to all beings that live on it. We are to consider it religiously. Put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. So from that, some echoes of Exodus chapter 3 also appear later on too. Later on in the book Holy Earth was published in 1915. Later on in 1957, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, in his book, The Divine Milieu, again would pick up that same idea, that same motif too as well. I don't know if he picked it up from Hyde Bailey, but again, it's a nice meditation. And this is from The Divine Milieu. As Jacob said, awakening from his dream, the world, this palpable world, which we want to treat with the boredom and disrespect, from which we habitually regard places of no association for us, is in truth a holy place, and we did not know it. So that idea of Bailey really opened up for me a way to meditate and connect with the earth. That a numinous experience or spiritual experience didn't have to be extraordinary, that it could be just ordinary. And I'm borrowing that a little bit from Helen Luke. She had a marvelous passage talking about when we looking for the extraordinary in the ordinary, and the ordinary in the extraordinary. So Bailey again speaks about that the earth is beyond us. We did not make it. It is sacred, it is holy. So it opened up for an idea that to experience something spiritual is here and now. For folks that, for at least myself spiritually, connecting with God is here today. And it could be in the simple act of gardening too as well. I'm going to share with you a dream I had, and then we'll get into the motifs of the garden, archetype of the garden. So the dream I had was when I was a director, and in the dream, I'm at the birth home of Liberty Hyde Bailey. And we're in the basement of his home, and everybody's gathered there. Everybody, meaning people from the museum, other friends and family, and we're all waiting for Liberty Hyde Bailey to show up. And as we're waiting down in the basement has this 1950s, 60s Thanksgiving vibe going on. And, you have the long table and long plastic sheets on the table, and there's food ready to be eaten. And of course, lo and behold, here comes down the basement steps Liberty Hyde Bailey, of course. Right? It's the man of the hour, and everybody's celebrating and congratulating him. And it's like, oh, he's arrived. And he comes over to me, of course, and I give him a nice big hug, shake his hands, of course. And, mind you, the man's passed on, but in the dream, he's animated. And my wife was with me, and she turns to Liberty Hyde Bailey and she goes, my husband's been the director at the museum, and he keeps on talking to me about this book, The Holy Earth. He goes, I know you wrote a lot of books, and I'm just trying to be introduced to you. So what would you recommend to me as my first Liberty Hyde Bailey book? And Bailey stops, and he really considers what she asks. He goes, that's a good question. I really like The Holy Earth. I think it's a good book. However, I recommend for you to read my gardening books first. And after you read my gardening books and you made yourself your own garden, then read The Holy Earth. And then you'll know what I'm talking about after you've made your own garden. I woke up with goosebumps, honestly. I was like, oh my gosh, it was very profound. So that led to a labor of love putting together his garden writings. And I think that's true. And I think that for the dream, it's like, if I had to interpret it, what does it mean is the idea is that his philosophy is solid and it's good, and it's practical too at the same time. It's tied to something real, which is the earth. And I think in the dream, at least that's what he was getting at, is that you have to have something that's just practical, something ordinary, to experience something that's extraordinary. And as we move into, finally, after I've laid this groundwork, we're going to get into his passages, and we're looking at these motifs of the garden that appear in his writings. So the motifs of the garden, the ones that I found, and these are fluid, by the way, they overlap each other like any motif. They're not always solid, but they do share sometimes. So again, these are looking at gardening as a subject and object. They're both things. Again, it's that archetypal idea that it's something that's studied, that you can study, but also it impacts you. It has its own characteristics. And so these characteristics, motifs, first to be bounded and unbounded. The other ones, the extraordinary in the ordinary, eternal youth, and death and rebirth. And so we're going to explore those motifs through his writings. So the first one is bounded and unbounded. So a garden in general, as we describe what a garden is, the very essence of a garden, what is it? It's something that's bounded. It's something that people have created. They've made a section out from their home or whatever they live, and they have fenced it in, right? So that's the general idea of what a garden is. However, for Bailey, we have an idea that a garden can be bounded, but at the same time, it could be unbounded too as well. So this comes from an essay called Marvels at Her Feet, and I'll be borrowing from this one a couple. This is what Bailey reported in one of his essays. Because I remember another gardener whom I asked, how much land have you? He answered with pride that he had 1 acre and added, it's a wonderful acre. It reaches to the center of the earth in one direction and takes in the stars in the other. And then Bailey finishes, the same is true of any square foot of earth. Right? Same is true for any square foot of earth. So you have bounded in 1 acre, this idea that it's bounded in an acre, but of course this person has this revelation. No, it's marvelous. It goes again to the center of the earth in one direction and takes in the stars in the other. This is called General Advice. This again is from a manual he wrote. And keep in mind, even though this is a manual, you can hear his prose. Again, we're talking about the idea of being bounded and unbounded and what we conceive of what a garden is. And this is what Bailey wrote about having a garden. He says, every family can have a garden. There's not a foot of land or a porches or windows. Wherever there is sunlight, plants be made to grow. And one plant in a tin can may be a more helpful, inspiring garden to some mind than a whole acre of lawn and flowers may be to another. The satisfaction of a garden does not depend upon the area, nor happily upon the cost or rarity of the plants. It depends upon the temper of the person. One must first seek to love plants and nature, and then to cultivate that happy peace of mind, which is satisfied with little. He'll be happier if he has no rigid and arbitrary ideals, for gardens are coquettish, particularly for the novice. If plants grow and thrive, he should be happy. And if the plants which thrive chance not to be the ones he planted, they are plants nevertheless. And nature is satisfied with them. We are apt to covet the things which we cannot have, but we are happier when we love the things which grow, because they must. A patch of lusty pigweeds growing and crowding and luxuriant abandon may be a better and more worthy object of affection than a bed of colossus, which every spark of life and spirit and individuality has been sheared out and suppressed. The man who worries morning and night about the dandelions in the lawn will find great relief in loving the dandelions. Each blossom is worth more than a gold coin as it shimmers in the exuberant sunlight of the growing spring and attracts the bees to its bosom. Little children love the dandelions. Why may not we? Love the things near at hand, and love intensely. If I were to write a motto over a gate of a garden, I should choose the remark which Socrates made as he saw the luxuries of the markets. How much there is in the world that I do not want. So in that, again, motif, again, we're talking about what a garden is. It explodes, Bailey explodes the idea of what it can be. It doesn't have to be. It can be a tin can, a plant in a tin can. So if you're growing that, you have your garden, right? So it's bounded, and then of course it has many possibilities. It's unbounded too as well. And that's just right from a manual. Again, you can hear his prose when he taps into that. It's really timeless prose. One more about bounded and unbounded. What makes a gardener? This is from the essay To One Who Hath No Garden. I know persons who are musicians and yet have no musical instruments. Some of them can perform on instruments and some of them cannot. If they are performers, they miss the instruments more. Do not most of us with a high taste for music secure our satisfaction in it from those more fortunate or more skillful than we? I know poets who do not write poetry, artists who do not paint, architects who do not build. I know gardeners who do not garden. So again, I guess in the bounded and unbounded idea is that we can again just really make, for Bailey's telling us we can have a larger encompassing idea of what a garden or a garden is. Usually when I was speaking with the group, I would ask, who's a gardener here? And not everybody would raise their hand, right? They would have an idea, well, I don't fit into that. I'm not a gardener, you need to know it. No, it doesn't have to be, should not have to be that. It's accessible to everybody. So it's accessible to everybody. The other motif I was speaking about is the extraordinary and the ordinary. Bailey really does a nice job on this. So this is another way too of looking at things. So this is from the Common Natural History. So again, we're looking at the extraordinary and the ordinary, or the ordinary and extraordinary. You can flop them. The first considerations of special study should be the inhabitants of your yard and garden. They are yours. Or if they are not yours, you are not living the right life. Do you wish to study botany? There are weeds in your dooryard or trees on your lawn. You say they are not interesting? That is not their fault. So again, the idea is that what's nearest at hand, the ordinary, is where people can tap into the extraordinary. Again, I'll make sure we have some time for some questions. I'm going to move into, again, we'll still be with the extraordinary and the ordinary. This comes from the essay, The Reverie of Gardens. It's a marvelous one. This one will tap into several ones. So as I read this, keep in mind the idea, aside from the extraordinary and the ordinary, the idea of the eternal youth, or youthful eternity, however you want to flip it, and also death and rebirth too as well. So these hit all the motifs in this essay. I'm going to read a section again. So again, it's a Reverie of Gardens. Have you made a garden all by yourself? Then try it if you have not. Do not delegate the work. Yourself thrust the spade deep into the tender earth. Bury your weight on the handle and feel the earth loosen and break. Turn over the load. You smell the soft, moist odor, an odor that takes you back to your younger and freer days, or sends you dreaming over the fields. You have uncovered the depths where the earthworm burrows and the pupa has lain since midsummer. Run your fingers through the soil. It is mealy, fine, clean. It may have been turned 100 times, yet it is new and virgin. You feel as if you could plant your feet in the soil and grow like a plant. Spade up the whole bed. Note how the loose earth settles into place as you draw your rake back and forth. The moisture steams from its bosom, and the drying surface affords a mulch to hold the water that lies in its depths. You are wondering what is contained in this earth. Men have spent their lives to answer that inquiry and have died without making the answer complete. Compounds of potassium and phosphorus and silicon and nitrogen and many more, millions of microorganisms that you cannot see and whose lives no man knows. Chemical activities too, complex to be analyzed, moisture and heat and magnetism, physical forces so intricate and subtle that they cannot be measured. All these are in the laboratory that you are preparing. Yet you are powerless to bring them forth into visible life. One day you will drop a speck of matter into the soil, A speck so small and round that you must depend on the label to tell you whether it is a cabbage or a turnip or cauliflower or mustard. And behold, a new being comes forth, endowed with life, with roots and stem and leaves, and flowers and fruits and seeds, all unfolding in their appointed sequence and season. Where is the seat of this mystery, of the alchemy that makes one seed unfold into a turnip and its counterpart into a cabbage? I often wonder how a cabbage seed knows that it's a cabbage seed. Again, I'll just mention again, you get that subjective feel too in the mystery and the idea of the soil and the eternal idea of the soil that it's eternally. It's just a wonderful piece. I'm going to read a section now from one of my favorite ones, if I had to choose a favorite one. So again, this is talking about the extraordinary and the ordinary. And it's an essay titled Leaves. Leaves. I'll read a couple pieces from that. Again, the leaves. So we can think about fall about this one. It hasn't quite arrived. Here we go. Again, the leaves are falling. They cover the ground, but the twigs are bare. The leaves will die in drifts and in windrows. By spring, they will be crushed and broken, and by autumn, they will have passed into the forest floor. Will be leaves no more. The twigs will stand all winter in the bitter air, apparently mere lifeless things, but one day in April or pregnant May, the tinge of life will be in them. Buds will swell and burst, and soft new fabrics will unfold and spread themselves to the warming sun. How they will come or why, no man is wise enough exactly to explain. A flat, thin, fragile tissue is a leaf that detaches itself at the appointed season, keeping good time with the procession of the year. Why it should come from a round, hard twig is beyond all calculation. Seen apart and without experience of miracles, no man would think a leaf and a twig of the same genesis. They would not suggest a relationship with the other. And still less would they suggest mothership of the inert ground, or the transparencies of sunshine in the air. At these marvels, men should stand with reverent mien, as in the midst of mysteries. The leaves are falling one by one. Miracles are in the air. I have one more to read for the eternal idea of an eternal youth, and then we'll get into death and rebirth. And then we'll open it up for questions. So this comes from an essay called The Garden Flows. It's written later in his life and appeared in a magazine that we were able to, my co-editor and I were able to find. It's called The Garden Flows. So Bailey was a very literate man too as well. His library is very extensive. And so he's speaking about the poet James Thompson and the poem Seasons. So this is Bailey called The Garden Flows. Recently I took from its shelf Thompson's Seasons to read once more the descriptions to feel the beneficence of the passing years. This copy was published in my wildering youth as a school and academic edition, although I do not remember its use in the ungraded school I attended. But the book has had a good place in my memory. Here I opened the first chapter, Spring, and I read, by nature's swift and secret working hand, the garden flows. Probably more than 200 years ago, James Thompson wrote that strain. It is as fresh and lively this morning as in that far time in another land. The spring is a product of the winter. The winter is a product of autumn, and autumn the product of summer, and summer of spring. We like to think of spring In our northern latitudes, it's the real beginning of the year because the plant starts to grow and the visible miracles to unfold. Yet the roots or the seed grew last year, which was then the new year. And life was all maintained continuously, whatever may have been the snowfall or the temperature. There is no ending and no beginning, only stages in a persisting and everlasting process. It is said there is nothing new under the sun, but the gardener's reaction is as new and fresh to him as if he were indeed the first of all. Yet there are new things under the sun. The columbines in my garden this spring have not been seen before, because I planted the seeds of them myself last July from hybridized stock. James Johnson has not seen what I now behold. It is mine, but it issues in gracious continuity from years that do not return. I find much satisfaction in this partnership with nature's swift and secret working hand. And I know that all my successors in times to come may partake in the kinship. The earth is ever prime and new. I have two more to share, and then we can wrap it up here. I used to read these part for programs at the Bailey Museum too. And what I enjoyed, besides reading them, which is always great, the reactions. His words just, and his voice just resonate and come alive. So these last two in the motifs about death and rebirth in the garden. And so I'm going to read a very short piece called Lessons of Today, a section that he did when he had to give a speech to launch an experiment station in Geneva in New York. And it was a very long, it had to deal with more about extension work. But then he ended with this wonderful meditation here. Above all, old and young, we must never lose faith in the soil. It is the source and condition of our existence. It never grows stale, and it never wears out. The earth is always young. And then he gets into a poem. The fields were parched with summer's heat. Life and green from swamps had fled. The dry grass crunched beneath the feet, and August leaves dropped stiff and dead. Then light south winds crossed wood and shore, brought cooling clouds and slow sweet rain. And hill and crops were new once more, and grasses greened on marsh and plain. So swift the magic scented spell, through burning corn and pastures dumb, 'twas clear the world had rested well against the time when the rain should come. So virile is the earth we own, so quick with life its soil is stung. 1,000,000 years have come and flown, and still it rises green and young. So the last one I'm going to read is, again, we're going to look at Marvels at Our Feet. This was written at the end of Bailey's life, and my co-editor called it this: he would cannibalize old essays. So he would take his old essays and regroup them and reintroduce them. So, well, nobody's read this before anyways. I published that book before I read it, so I'll republish it. And so he did a wonderful job on this. I think probably this overture. It's called Marvels at Her Feet. It's a longer essay, but I'm going to read just the last segment of it. And again, this is talking about death and rebirth. You may hear other reverberations in there too as well, about the bounded and unbounded too as well. He's speaking about a strawberry plant. So there's also the miraculous, the extraordinary and ordinary too as well. This strawberry plant has triumphed, it has lived, it is bearing fruit. At first sight, there is very little in it that to suggest kinship with the vast transparencies of sunshine and air. Yet this stem, this leaf, this fruit are all of sun, soil, and air compounded. This small scarlet fruit is oxygen, is hydrogen, it is carbon, the carbon you see in smoke. It is nitrogen, a gas that you have not perceived as such, although you live always within it. It is calcium, magnesium, phosphorus. It is iron, the same iron that is in a locomotive. It is potassium and other elements besides. This fruit is water, water delicately and deliciously flavored with many intricate compounds. Perhaps it is nearly 90% water, yet so nicely is the fluid held in fiber and cell that revolve it as I may gently, and the water does not spill. Inconceivable are the energies locked in the unyielding earth and in the invisible air. Flowers and herbage are all perfect and shapely and colorful, wrought by the countless addition of cell on cell, are whipped away, broken by storm, trampled by cattle, as if they were the very riffraff of creation. Numberless millions of insects, matchless in shape, complete to the last detail, an amazing exactness and adjustment of circulatory, digestive, nervous, and sexual systems, dance for a moment in the sun, then are gone forever. And no account is kept. The millions of men have come hopefully into being and have forthwith passed away, and nobody knows where they have gone. The legions rise, march a little day, and perish. Others take their place. Pageant never ends. See now how these leaves of the small strawberry plant stand forth, extended to bathe themselves in light. Delicate, visible forces of life are moving mysteriously in these thin tissues, hidden away in laboratories themselves invisible. Every laboratory and every process is perfect and fully furnished, as if each leaf were to last forever. These leaves will die. They will rot. They will disappear into the universal mold. Stuff that is in them will pass elsewhere, perhaps to the egg of a newt, to the root of a tree, to a fish in a pool. The energy will be re-released to reappear. The ions to act again, perhaps in the corn on the plain, perhaps in the body of a bird. The atoms and the ions remain or resurrect. The forms change in flux. We see the forms and we mourn the change. We think all is lost, yet nothing is lost. The harmony of life is never ending. Every man in his heart knows that this is so. Every man knows in his heart that there is goodness and wholeness in the rain, in the wind, the soil, the sea, the glory of a sunrise, and in the sustenance we derive from the earth. We deceive ourselves if we turn from the essentials and try to satisfy ourselves with the small and trivial gratifications of this age. Let us look more closely about us and see how good are the common things, how marvelous are all things made at the beginning. The meaning of life is in its beauty. In 10,000 years from now, children will call across the centuries that the world is young, that the sunshine is good, that love and faith and mystery and the buoyancy of life are the only realities. And that was from Marvels at Her Feet. One thing I'd like to do, and I hope this isn't too navel-gazy, but I am going to share a link to Cornell Press, where these collections came from. I have a promotional code You can get 30% off the book. My rationale for this is just I want to spread the word, the gospel of Liberty Hyde Bailey. So that's basically it. So, but that will say you go to that link. There's that 09 flyer. You'll get 30% off. This way you don't have to order it from Amazon too if you don't have a local bookstore. We don't need any more rocket ships in space. So. Well, thank you, folks. You've been very attentive and patient. So I do want to open up if anybody sends any questions. It was just marvelous just to read again. Well, thank you. Yeah, the book title is Reverie of Gardens, Gardener's Companion. And I hope, again, it's the garden that from this, again, that if you don't have a garden, you may realize that, or you might have a garden after all. All you need is a plant in your patio. And you can use these as daily meditations too, as well, in your gardening. Remember, you don't have to garden to be a gardener. You just have to appreciate it. What a relief in that, right? And if you really want to get into it, yeah, you could do soil samples, send them off to the Michigan State Extension Service. They'll analyze your soil and tell you what you have to put in if you want to get into it, or you don't have to. Depends how you want to start learning the Latin names of the plants. Yeah, I don't. I know Bailey wanted me to, but I just don't want to do that. So I just appreciate what I do. I just appreciate that we have a compost bin in back. So I never had gardened before until I had read Bailey. So we have a compost pile in the back, and so everything goes in there, even the pumpkins. And so every spring, pumpkins grow from the compost pile, and just transpose them onto my garden. And that's always, again, nature is allowing it to happen. All I have to do is let her lead the way. And so I have two plots, one that I plant, tomatoes and some what have you, and then marigolds. And then I have the other garden, which is one from the compost pile, which always does better than the one I plant. But I'll never stop doing my own. The marigolds are doing really well. You can't go wrong with marigolds. Those are almost indestructible. They're like hostas. So.
John, I think I missed the beginning tonight. So I don't know what you said then, but he seems to be somebody that any of it, that we can jump on it wherever we are in our appreciation or lack thereof, of the garden. And I live with a gardener more than I am one myself, who's sort of a crazy person. He's in the same room here. He's hidden in the corner.
I see him in the back.
He's listening, and he's read this book. He's read your book.
Yeah.
But today I was reading him something out of the book that is an outlook on winter.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you read this tonight, but
I didn't read that one, no.
You did? Okay. Many times in warm countries, I've been told that the climate has transcendent merit because there's no winter. But to me, this lack is its disadvantage. So it's the cycle of the seasons that has this transcendent merit, for him. But I see that in this gardener I live with, who spends all the seasons either dreaming about or, participating in the garden.
Yes.
And I find I attach to this book in the poetic sense. I'm always finding one-liners that I calligraphy or jot in my journal. And there was one you said tonight that I wonder if you would repeat. And it had to do with the soil. The opening line was the soil. And I think it was the second to the last one that you read. And it was, I think, the opening sentence. And I don't know where to look for it. So, and I wanted to hear it again.
It's the one with the poet that, we must not lose faith in the soil.
Maybe it was that. We must not lose faith in the soil. And then because the soil, is there a next line?
Yep. Let me pull it up here real quick. And it's interesting when I like it is that it talks about where we are seasonally right now in the summer. So above all, old and young, we must never lose faith in the soil. It's the source and condition of our existence. It never grows stale and never wears out. The earth is always young.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah.
And for me, what that brings back actually is first grade, walking down the hallway and seeing the bulletin boards for fall, right? Learning about the seasons for the very first time, right? And learning the seasons for the first time, they were new, right? And everything was new. It was just wonderful. We saw this whole mosaic proceed, and it's like the plants looked new, everything looked new, and then the trees looked new, everything had longevity in life. That's what that reminded me of. It's like, wait a minute. It's just like, yes, how is that? I mean, it's like, it didn't have to be like that, does it? But that is the pattern that's set before us. That is continually new. So yeah, it's a wonderful phrase. It really does bring up a lot. And Bailey made a lot of, he was also known as the Indiana Jones of botany because he did a lot of explorations, specifically just to get plants. His 90th birthday at Cornell, they were planning a big celebration and they couldn't find him. It's because he was in South America looking for plants at 90, right? And he mentioned he had a glorious birthday. He was all by himself and he found the plants and he was all alone. It's like, yep, this is how I want to spend my birthday. And so he found his, plant he was looking for. And of course, they had to have the celebration a little later on. But even at his 90th birthday, he was still doing his plant exploration. So.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm wondering, did he have a special affinity with any particular plant from all the writings that you've read?
Yeah, the two I'll pick out three.
Okay.
What he wrote about a lot were the much maligned dandelion.
Dandelions.
That was one of his favorites. He would write about the dandelion and talked about it. Again, it's like you get into an essay of what is a weed. And he says, well, there's no real definition. It's just a plant out of place. Right. But then he mentioned, if anything's out of place, it's what's a cultivated plant because we put it there to begin with. The dandelion hasn't been cultivated. I mean, if anything's in place, it's a dandelion, right? So he would always turn a phrase on that. So dandelion would be one. He would do extensive collections, however, in the palms too, as well. That's why he went down, to the Caribbean, down to the warmer climates, the palm family, because he got dared by his wife. He goes, "Can you tell me what this one is?" So, oh my gosh, I can't. And so the next thing you know, that was the big push. He goes, so he did serious studies in palms, and some of the plants are named after him too, as well. The one that sticks out for me though are raspberries. And so that was native to his area. He wrote poems on bellflowers too, as well. Talked about the bellflowers that are native to his area. And then I said three, but I'll throw one more last one. It was garden pinks. So we know them, as carnations is that family of garden pinks. And the reason why is that his mother passed away when he was relatively very young, about 3 or 4 years old. And his mother had a plot of garden pinks. After she passed away, his father had him tend those pinks. Well, that's probably where his starting piece to gardening and botany began. As he moved through not having a mother, he connected to a deeper, Mother Nature that way. And he would talk about that all the way up into his late years, calling those plants old friends too, as well. And there's a book called Gardens and Pinks too. So.
Yeah, well, that piece on the strawberry was really stunning. I mean, that's, the cosmic dimensions of it. And
right? Yeah. I'm glad to appreciate that. Yeah, the ordinary, the extraordinary in the ordinary, right? So it's a wonderful meditation. I'm glad you like that one.
Yeah, thank you.
John, I have my camera off, but can I?
Absolutely.
Well, maybe Martha wants to go first.
John?
Yep.
I was struck by what appeared to be a flow of action and contemplation in his
Hmm.
writings, or maybe it's primarily in your selection of his writings, and how his foundation is that the earth is holy ground.
Yes.
Many times people garden to make the landscape look lovely and attractive, or to produce food. And
Yeah.
if the food is produced, that's a success. But for him, it was seems to be a more complex, meditative or contemplative approach.
Yeah.
To the garden.
Absolutely. What I received from that was looking in my gardening now as a sacrament, right? By me having a water barrel in the back, saving the water rain and watering my garden through the rain, just going in, turning the soil over, pruning the plants, caressing the plants, seeing some of them die out, right? Seeing how the seeds of the strawberry plants I have in the backyard, I did not plant those. Some bird planted them, right? So all that, though, I mean, that is what I would say a sacrament. That's how it has been for me, and it's a way to connect to, again, a holy earth. It's right here and now in the present. Yeah, I get that's what I received from it, the same idea. It's not just, I grew some flowers and here they are. No. Yeah, I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad you picked that up.
So the thing that I wanted to, and I'm sorry everyone that I have my camera off. We've got 2 Zooms going at the same time in this house, so our Wi-Fi can only handle so much. But this was really wonderful, and it's so, I found your selection really moving, John, and the way that you moved through them. And I guess I'm kind of building on what Crystal said, about how really, this relates to what Martha was just saying too, that for Bailey, gardening was, well, you started out when you were talking about Bailey's philosophy and the Holy Earth was saying it's a very practical philosophy, right?
Right, yeah.
And it strikes me that gardening becomes this really practical way to ground your experiences and to, one of the things that I took to the reading that you just gave, which was new, was I have a family member right now who's dying, and hearing these meditations about growth and rebirth and the ways that the whole world kind of opens up in Bailey's experiences with the gardening also reminds me of what you were saying about that garden of pinks that he had when he was a child. I'm really glad you brought that up, where this 4-year-old's mother dies, and suddenly, what do you do with this information? How do you move forward? And it was a traumatic experience, dying from diphtheria. And this 4-year-old is standing right next to the bedside, watching her pass into the silence. And it strikes me that that's tied up with his own love of gardening, right? That this was a thing that helped him get through this difficult time, and around which he was able to build this whole life philosophy that's so rich and meaningful to us today, that birthed so many beautiful writings. So I guess that's just me appreciating what you've laid out. But if I have a question, I guess it might be you mentioned how you've been cultivating your own garden since discovering Bailey. And I wondered if you could just maybe speak to how your own gardening practice has helped you understand Bailey, or helped you understand these bigger questions in your own life. Would you say that it's had that effect, or yeah?
Okay. I have had more of a practical connection I've known, actually I had another piece here. Helen Luke from Apple Farm actually had a profound numinous experience about one of her plants in her backyard too, and a lotus that she was connected to. A very deep connection. I haven't had anything as deep like that. I think the only thing that I've had that changed my outlook again was, the Bailey dream. I shared the Bailey dream that I had that you know of, John. John's, by the way, John Lindstrom's the co-editor of the book with me. That I shared that Bailey dream of him saying, "No, you got to read my garden writings first," right? And reading those garden writings, again, you know this about Bailey is that it's like it's okay to soar in the stars, and your Pegasus. You may know I'm paraphrasing. Your Pegasus soaring in the stars, but it has to be hitched to something. It has to be hitched to something practical. And for me, it's most of my experience has been the practicality of it. But the cycle of the seasons has been huge. For the first time this year, I've let the sunflower stalks that died off, I didn't pull them. I let them stand. I had some corn shucks that were died off from last year. I didn't pull them. I let them stand. And then the next thing I know, for the corn shucks, then I have for this year in my garden, it's like my pumpkins are vining around those old dead corn shucks, right? That I had from those sunflower stalks that I've kept. Its progeny had planted itself around them, and they stabilized them for their growth process, right? And then also it's like during the wintertime, when everything's like hibernating, I'll look in my backyard. I got those corn shucks still out there. I still have those sunflower stalks still reminding me of that spring. And so I realized I know wherever I moved around a lot. And it took me like 1 year to get footed into wherever my new place was. So I experienced the seasons. This is the seasonal aspect, and Bailey knows this. It's like for a gardener, they listen now for the first robin of the spring, which is true for me now. I never really took time to do that. I wait for that. I anticipate now in the springtime, the first call of the robin. And I know it now, and it's mine, right? It's again, hearing old friends, and it's comforting. It's reassuring. It's the cycle going. I mean, last night I heard the robins. I know they won't be around for a little while. We got them for a couple more months. So it's those cycles, it's those patterns that sometimes I think are invisible. Bailey has at least woken me up to this, just the practicality, the ordinary, the extraordinary and the ordinary. That's made me, it doesn't have to be a huge revelation. The revelation's already here before us. As he said in the essay Leaves, the leaves are falling. There's miracles in the air. Or do we say, well, I gotta rake the lawn again? Which way are we going to move forward? I pick the other one. It's like I'm raking up miracles in my front lawn. I think that's what Bailey's done for me and his writing. And it also, to the last part, we think all is lost. Nothing is lost. So it reassures me too of, what happens in the big silence when we move on. At least for me, this reassures me that things continue. And that's where I hang my faith on.
Yeah, you said you didn't have any profound experiences to share, but I think that counts.
I sold myself short.
Thanks. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I have a comment.
Yes. Nope. You dropped out a little bit, Ophelia. Hopefully you can get her back.
Can you hear me?
There we go. Yes. Yes.
Oh, okay. I say with endo plants, playing music for plants while pruning and talking with the plants, I think is kind of a meditation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Bailey mentioned like one of his essays. I've seen a gardener talk with his plants, and not one of them have complained back to him. So little turn of a phrase on them, but Yeah, my mom would do the same thing, Ophelia, when she would transplant, when she'd steal like little flower nibs, whatever, plant nibs from the nursery store and, hijack them in her pocket and, grow them. She would, again, oh, you're doing so good. Oh, look at you, right? And so they become subjective, right? They're not just a plant, they have their own character, their own personality, right? That makes sense to me, that makes sense to me.
This isn't really about gardening, but you two guys have given me words that I'm not sure I've ever heard before. And it's what you just said about passing into the great silence. I have not heard those words about death, dying, and I love them. I think that is so wonderful. And I think about plants and seeds, and they are in the great silence, deep in the earth. And yeah, so thank you for those words.
Sure. Yeah. I think that came from Bailey, didn't it, John?
Yeah, that was from his 90th birthday speech that John mentioned when they threw that party, but they had to delay it because he was out collecting palms in the tropics. He told a story of losing his mother at the age of 4. And this was when he was at the age of 90. And that's when he said that he stood by her bedside and watched her pass into the silence.
Yeah.
Credit where credit is due.
There we go.
Another Bailey.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Also, the tenacity of plants that will come up through the concrete.
Oh my gosh.
It's just amazes me.
Yes.
It happens around my place all the time.
Yeah.
Reminds me of that song, There's a Rose in Spanish Harlem.
Yeah.
Sometimes they will do that and refuse to come up in the garden the right way.
Yes. Right. And if that's the case, Bailey would say, well, just love the plants that grow anyways, right? So, if you planted something and they don't thrive, that's all right too. Just love the ones that thrive. Yeah, even if, I have like a box, a window box, and I don't know what they are. They started looking very weedy, but everything else didn't grow. So we're going to see where these things go. I have no idea. But I love them. They're still there, and I don't even have to water them. That's one thing Bailey said about geraniums. So I like geraniums so much. He goes, geraniums says I could go away on vacation for a week and come back, and they're fine. That's the kind of plant I want. I don't want something that's going to wilt by me just looking at the thing. It's like, no, I want something vigorous. So one thing you really like that aspect about geraniums is like, yeah, them for a week, they're fine on their own.
Did he start the institution of extension schools? I think I heard that or read that somewhere. Is that right?
He didn't start, but he was at the forefront of that. So there were two laws that were passed through Congress that really helped him out in his career. One of them was land grant, opened up the land grant colleges, and so that got him out to Michigan agriculture. And there was another one that escapes me, but what it was a law that had colleges that had the agricultural land colleges to have experimental stations. So they could do that and then reach out to the farmers. And so Bailey at that time was at MSU, and then he got picked by Cornell when that law had passed. So they need somebody to fill that piece. So he was at the forefront of that. And that's when a lot of his writing just really took off, because he started writing these, leaflets one after another, and just prodigious, because he was right in his element. Then he would later slip into also working with nature study too, that movement. He was at the forefront of that, writing leaflets, educational leaflets for schools too as well. One of his co-workers was Anna Bosper Comstock, and her book, I'm trying to remember the study, nature study,
Handbook of Nature Study.
Thank you, John. I knew you were gonna. Thank you. Handbook. It's still in print. It has not gone out of print still. So he was at the forefront of that too. So he was at the beginning of a lot of things in the extension service. Of course, there was the 4-H too as well. He was very interested in making sure that there was a correct understanding and correct education as far as teaching children. And it starts with the curiosity of what it is, what the plant is, and then learn. So.
Thank you.
John,
Yep.
I've looked forward to this for a long time. And John Lindstrom, it's good to have you here, even though we can't see you. I enjoyed your preface in the book, and some of it, a lot of us know John, but not you, but not the other John. So I just realized.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was so happy to be able to attend today. John talks about this group a lot, and so it's nice to see some of you and to hear everyone interacting with these writings. So it's been so fun working with John too. Like, he's a great guy, and we've had a lot of good jazz over the years. As we like to say, we've done a lot of good jazz.
What I like about our relationship is that we can confuse a lot of people because of our first name. Right? So it's like, John, he edited the book, but which John? No, okay. We were directors at the museum too, as well. So that really compounds the, well, you remember John, the director? Well, which one? Right, so.
We like confusing people.
Yeah, there we go. You got to keep people on their toes. So.
And when I got in here tonight and got back to my email there, I have a few emails of people who couldn't get on. So a few disappointed folks who couldn't get the links right. So we'll work on that a little bit, John, and get, make it clearer in the newsletter, maybe how to get on.
Right.
But it's good to have all of us here. Some of you I haven't met. We don't all know one another, but it's good to be together here and to be with you, John. Thank you. The next Apple Farm group will be the fourth Thursday in August. And the next group will be Don Troyer, Jungian analyst, who will be doing Jung's The Undiscovered Self. So thank you all for.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And you, John. Yeah.